Hello and welcome back to the channel of Culture Academy. It is great to have you with us. Last time we talked about high context culture and low context culture. Today we want to see how the context cultures influence our communication. Let us do a little exercise. Here's a picture of the entrance of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The question is, can you read this picture? A message is not just a spoken or written word. This picture wants to give us a message. It is a high context communication. But can I, from a low context culture, read it and understand it? Well, I will give you the story of the picture of the portal of Notre Dame Cathedral at the end of this video. So stay tuned and wait for the explanation. But can I, when I'm from a low context communication culture, understand what a person from a high context culture wants to tell me, and vice versa? So let us look at the different communication styles right after the intro. Well, first let us see what communication really means. So on the one side you have the sender who is encoding a message, and on the other side you have the receiver who is decoding the message. So you have a sender and a receiver. So the sender sends a message, encodes it, and sends it to the receiver, and the receiver is decoding it. To good communication also belongs feedback. But then we also have our communication filters. Well, communication filters are our glasses with which we see the world, its values and beliefs and assumptions. Then further on we have communication channels. How do we transmit the message? So there are different communication channels such as written words or verbal expressions. There's audio or the tone of voice. There are pictures. There also is space or time that communicates. You can find also smell and touch when it comes to communication. These channels all give a message. It is much trickier if it comes to a cross-cultural communication, because I have my own cultural glasses and the other person has his own or her own cultural glasses. The cultural filters are much different, and the context, of course, is one of the cultural filters. Well, now let us move to the cross-cultural communication styles of a high context or person or culture and a low context person or culture. Now let's look at the high context and the low context communication cultures. In the high context communication culture, the message is implicit. The information is in the person or in the context. It's pre-programmed. The information in the sender is in the sender and also in the receiver. And a place must be left for adaptation and for interpretation. On the other side, on the low context culture, it's the message in the low context culture, the message is very explicit. The people need to gather the information. Information is in the message itself, and everything must be very clear. There can be no ambiguity. The high context communication culture is very indirect. The listener has to discern the intention of the speaker. For example, they would say, well, I wonder who broke my iPhone or my smartphone. Just the opposite in the low context communication. It's very direct. They would say, did you break my smartphone? In the high culture, the meetings are very formal. It's kind of an official office setting. In the low context culture, it can be very informal. Informal meetings such as breakfast meetings or lunch meetings. The high context culture communication prefers the verbal form. The relationship is very important. The context is determined by whom I can trust, so it's a trust relationship with the other person. The history with the other person is very important. Also, the reading of the tone of voice, the facial expression, gestures are important in the high context communication. Whereas in the low context communication, it's most often in a written form. You want to control what is said. There are many facts and it's driven by logic, but you want to put it into a contract or into reports. Agendas are very important also in that culture. The high context culture gives slow messages. Well, slow messages, for example, are in the arts, in dance, in songs, in theater. They use stories, they use a lot of books, poetry, or even rituals. In the low context communication, it is a fast message. Well, think about MTV or these music videos. Think about WhatsApp messages, text messages, little memos or emails. Twitter is very common these days. They use headlines, they use the news headlines, TV commercials. So we need to observe and pay attention that none of these context communication forms exist in its pure form. Well, what can we learn from these different context communication cultures? A low context communication person seems to be rude to a high context person. They are too direct, and we will talk about indirect and direct later on again. A high context communication person seems to be too indirect to a low context person. What does he really want? Why isn't he telling me everything? So he knows it, but he doesn't tell me. Why is he holding back? Is he really telling the truth? So people can really misunderstand each other very far. What is your style in comparison with that of your colleague or your audience or the people in your host culture? Well, think how you can become more familiar with your host culture style. You need to think about what is your style in comparison with that of your colleague or your audience or the people in your host culture. What is your communication style? Think how you can become more familiar with the host culture style. Do not judge if their style does not match your own style. Remember, you are the guest and you have to adapt to the other person, especially if you live in a host culture. Now let's look at a brief explanation of the portal of Notre Dame, what I promised you before. Well, this picture is the last judgment day out of the Bible in Revelation chapter 20. Above you can see Jesus Christ. He's sitting on the judgment throne, surrounded by a host of angels. And two angels, one is holding a spear and the other one is holding a cross, and a few chosen people next to him. To his feet you see the image of the New Jerusalem. In the first row below we can see two angels blowing a trumpet, calling for the judgment day. People are coming out of their graves, ordinary people, soldiers, and even noble people. Well, then in the row above you can see many people again, a variety of different people appearing in the front of the angel and the demon or devil with a scale. This signifies the judgment. To the left, people with nice robes looking up towards the throne, and they are guided by an angel towards the gate of heaven. To the right, other people who are chained are guided by two demons or devils into the hell. There may be many more details, but we don't have the time right now to look at that. Well, this sculpture is an example of a high context communication, which has often been used in former times, even in the West. Today, hundreds and even thousands of people walk below this image every day when they visit the Cathedral of Notre Dame. They don't even realize that there is a message for them. Are they even aware of that? Are they able to read this message? We have not learned to read these old contextual messages. Okay, thanks for watching and staying with me until the end. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Tell us about your communication experience with people from a high context culture or from a low context culture. Write it down below in the comments. Give us an example down below and communicate it with us. Don't forget to subscribe. Watch the other videos about understanding cultures. And please come back and learn more about cross-cultural understanding. Thanks and goodbye. See you the next time.